But let's move on, members, to the second panel, which is made up of proponents of Proposition 16, Ed Bedwell on behalf of Pacific Gas and Electric, Mark Brugat on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, and Michelle Peelsticker on behalf of the California Taxpayers Association. A reminder that both this panel and the following panel, representatives of the opponents' side, were sort of self-selected. We'll afford up to 20 minutes on each side, just to be fair. And if we can hold our questions until the end of each panel, we'll allow them to get through their presentations. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Padilla, Chairman Fuentes, members of the committee, other members of the Senate and the Assembly. I'm Ed Bedwell with Pacific Gas and Electric. I'm the Senior Director of State and Local Government Relations for the company. PG&E is one of the supporters of Proposition 16, along with other business organizations, taxpayer groups, and labor. For background purposes, for those of you that don't know, Pacific Gas and Electric serves more than 15 million Northern and Central California customers in the approximate geographic area from Kern County in the south to just short of the Oregon border in the north. So what does Proposition 16 do, and why do we support it? Proposition 16 does one simple thing. It requires voter approval before local governments can spend money or incur public debt to get into the retail electric business. It does not prohibit municipal government or local government from entering into the retail electric business. It does require a 2/3 vote approval. Why are we involved? PG&E is committed to providing its customers with safe and reliable energy service throughout our service territory. That's our responsibility. That's what we're in business to do. And our mandates are carried out through the California Public Utilities Commission and through the state legislature. PG&E has been providing that service in our service territory of Northern and Central California for more than 100 years. We have a deep connection and commitment to our valued customers. When local governments enter into the retail electric business, it can cost taxpayers millions or possibly billions of dollars in public money or debt. These are potentially risky, long-term capital decisions that can have significant impact on local spending or other budget priorities. They may result in increased consumer electric rates, or, as Ledge Counsel and the analyst stated previous to our appearance here, they could lower it. In our opinion, they have an upward pressure because there is an acquisition cost, a significant acquisition cost. And those decisions are not easily reversed. If any alternative program to deliver retail electricity adversely impacts our customers, puts them at risk, or could possibly fail, PG&E believes its customers should be fully informed and aware of the risk. Remember that the failure of one of these programs will send those customers back to Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, or Southern California Edison, who have the obligation to serve that customer under current law. Why shouldn't the customer, the constituent, the voter, have a say in that decision? As in the case with many local government taxing and borrowing measures, Proposition 16 requires a 2/3 vote. This is not an insurmountable obstacle. It is the standard for general obligation non-school infrastructure bonds which taxpayers are responsible for. And since 2002, voters throughout the state have given their approval to hundreds of important projects locally with 2/3 majorities. So let me shift to what Proposition 16 does not do. It is not a power grab by the utilities designed to stifle competition. It does not stop the startup of new municipal retail electric service. It requires a vote. In recent years, the voters have made that decision in many jurisdictions and areas, but the current law does not require a vote. Prop 16 does not preclude local governments from studying or considering whether to initiate a community choice aggregation program. The initiative does not impact the funding of clean, renewable energy by local governments. In fact, those types of projects are specifically exempted from the initiative's provisions. Proposition 16 does not affect existing municipal utilities that are sole providers within their territories, such as LADWP, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, unless they wish to expand retail electric delivery service beyond their existing service territory. And the measure does not block public funding that has already been approved by the voters, or public funding used for purposes other than getting into the retail electric business. As many of you know, there have been numerous entrees into the power business over the last decade throughout the state of California. 2 years ago, there was the highly visible election in San Francisco, Measure H, which would have started the process of municipalization in the city. Years earlier, the SMUD annexation received a lot of attention. SMUD's proposal to take over PG&E's service territory in Yolo County. That was decided by voters of both counties. So this proposition is not inconsistent with recent activity of either acquisition or takeover. Local government examination of providing retail electric service is not limited to just the PG&E service territory. This is not just about PG&E. Our IOU colleagues to the south have recently been involved with cities such as San Marcos and Corona and others looking to acquire investor-owned utility systems. As was recently reported in the Chronicle 4 days ago, the co-director of the Energy Institute at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, Severin Borenstein, a witness who has been before this body on numerous occasions in both chambers, stated the chances of actually saving money are, quote, pretty non-existent for any local government that gets into the power business. The idea, he said, is fraught with dangers given the complexities of the market. We couldn't agree with him more than that. And I can't find a better way to close my remarks as to why PG&E supports Proposition 16 and gives the voters the right to decide.
Before we get to the next speaker, members of the committee, question for us. The three members on this panel are in front of us are the ones listed on the agenda. We saw no stranger to us, Scott Wetch, on behalf of organized labor seeking to join in on this panel. Unless there's an objection from the committee, I'm comfortable allowing that. But if there's an objection from the committee, that was not something that was previously noticed. Is there an objection? Seeing none. Okay. Continue.
Chairman Padilla, Chairman Fuentes, and members of the committee, my name is Mark Burgatt. I'm the Vice President of the California Chamber of Commerce. We represent the employers in the state. We have over 16,000 members. We too are here today in support of Proposition 16. I think fundamentally the Chamber of Commerce and the business community believes that there is a higher level of scrutiny required anytime you use the taxpayers' money, especially this much of the taxpayers' money for this type of risky long-term involvement. And specifically when you're raising taxpayer money that will be used specifically to compete or replace a private business. We believe Prop 16 also prevents the municipal utility to cherry pick certain areas that would have a higher rate of return and leave those other areas to be serviced by the independent operators that would ultimately have a lower rate of return. And we believe these endeavors are not without significant risk. As we've heard from Dr. Borenstein, there are significant risks. There are significant long-term capital commitments to this sort of endeavor. And any time that you do that, and you commit those funds long term, we believe that fundamentally the voters should have an opportunity to vote on that. And ultimately, the Chamber of Commerce and the business community believe that the voters have a right to vote on anything that is this risky, this significant, this large amount of funds. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for this long a period of time. And for those reasons, we support Proposition 16.
Submember Amiano. Yeah, let's the panel finish, and then we'll have questions of all of them.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Michelle Peelsticker, California Taxpayers Association. We associate ourselves with the comments of Mr. Bergat from Cal Chamber. And we'd also like to add that in expanding utility, a cost-benefit analysis is always in order, and we see this proposition as simply extending that cost-benefit analysis to the voters and allowing them to make that decision. A two-thirds vote is not an insurmountable barrier. Our records show that 62% of the parcel taxes placed on the ballot last year passed by a two-thirds vote, despite the fact that we're in tough economic times. And of those that were rejected, half failed to garner even a simple majority vote, making the two-thirds threshold a non-issue. So we welcome the right of taxpayers to decide whether their local government should incur debt that may impact other services as well as taxes and fees into the future. And for these reasons, we strongly support Proposition 16.
Mr. Chair and members, thank you for allowing me to participate. I apologize there was a miscommunication amongst the proponents on who is going to be participating today. On behalf of the Coalition of Utility Employees representing nearly all the employees at both the investor and municipally owned utilities, we support Proposition 16, particularly because our support comes from our disillusionment with community choice aggregation. Had we known today, then what we know today about the way these CCA proposals have unfolded when we went neutral on AB 117, and had we been aware of the industry, the cottage industry of consultants that it has spawned, and what we believe to be a lack of transparency oftentimes in the information provided in the local processes, we never would have gone along with AB 117. As this committee knows, and you, Mr. Chair, specifically, we believe we have a crisis in California in regards to our infrastructure, our transmission and distribution infrastructure. We believe that the investor-owned utilities are doing a fairly good job at trying to modernize the infrastructure. We have some grave concerns about the status of the distribution systems of many of the municipally owned utilities. And what we fear with community choice aggregation is that because the local authority has no obligations at all to worry about the maintenance and the adequate operations of the transmission and distribution system, then it creates downward pressure on getting those critical capital resources allocated through the PUC to be able to do that work. That they provide the power, but there's as rates are inflated at the local level, there is an incentive for the local communities to put pressure at the PUC against any rate increases dedicated to T&D. And so we're very concerned with that, and for that reason we're supporting Proposition 16.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from members of the committee, beginning with the Submember Amiano.
Yep, to either of you, but maybe the chamber. You want to elaborate on this, what has been referred to as a drafting error in the measure that has caused the realtors now to come out against it?
I can briefly. I think we believe that the realtors in their rush to oppose this have actually analyzed this incorrectly. We don't agree with the way that they've analyzed it. And I can defer to Mr. Bedwell, but I believe the key there is that this discusses expansion of retail electricity supply.
Assembly member, we would agree with that. We're in obvious disagreement with the realtors on this. As the Senate chair has indicated, the state has service. And if you get into the retail business, if this proposition were to pass, then this would come into play. But we do not see how the addition of a neighbor or annexation or across the street, how we can read that into this proposition.
Thank you. But I do think you're going to have an additional battle on your hands, and alienating those who are usually in your camp is not a good sign, and it doesn't show a lot of care was taken around this ballot measure, and it speaks to some of the salacious exaggerations that I've heard. But I'll leave that up to the opponents to address.
Member Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bedwell, I appreciate your testimony about the public policy rationale for this initiative, but it does cause me to wonder why the other investor-owned utilities are not supporting it if those arguments are so compelling statewide. Could you speak to why you're all alone on this one?
I don't know that we are all alone, but I cannot speak for Southern California Edison or for San Diego Gas and Electric.
Okay. The irony also has not escaped me that the current law that allows creation of community choice aggregation does not require two-thirds voter approval, and it's a law, if I'm not mistaken, that you supported a few years back. PG&E actually supported. Why did you support that policy framework at the time and suddenly feel so strongly that a dramatically different policy framework is essential?
Well, with regards to community choice aggregation, I think that what we have done is we have seen, it was alluded to by Mr. Wetch, I'll take a little bit of a cue from him. I think what you have in a number of circumstances with community choice aggregation is you have entities that are providing information that may lead some people to a conclusion that we find hard to believe. We are in the business of, as I indicated, of providing energy services, both gas and electric, to two-thirds of the geographic portion of the state of California. We believe that we know what the price of power is when you buy it in bulk like we do. And when people come in and make representations to aggregators, people interested in aggregation, and they make some of the claims that they have, we believe that we have an obligation to tell our customers that. And that's something that I don't think was envisioned in AB 117. When one of the examples I would offer you would be in Mr. Valine's area, where there was an effort to put a power authority together under the CCA umbrella. And when it was finally put on the table what they would actually be able to provide power for, or whether they could meet the claims of PG&E or of the aggregators, that entity is not in business today. So that's why we have taken a second look at some of the provisions of CCA, and why we have argued that we should have the opportunity to discuss the perils that go in, because as I stated in my testimony, if somebody has, the way CCA operates right now, as you know, is you have only the opt-out, you don't have the opt-in.
Right.
So you sign up for something, let's say you just don't like it, it doesn't work, or it doesn't meet the advertisements that have been put before you. Where does that customer go? He defaults back to the utility. And so therefore, as you know, having been on the committee, we then have to arrange for that power that we have since said, nope, that they've gone. It's an additional cost. It's not on, it's usually on the spot, as opposed to in your procurement plan. So we think it's fraud and has impacts to our other customers.
So Mr. Bedwell, I want to follow up just on one piece of this. If there are problems with the CCA framework as to the representations that can be made, how folks go about forming a CCA that you believe are problematic, CCA is a creature of statute. Why wouldn't you bring a statute through this body to modify that policy framework, which we do all the time, and we could have taken a look at that in an open and deliberative way as it moved through the legislature instead of going to an initiative?
Well, I don't think this initiative is just targeted at CCA.
So did you consider legislation, or was this
We
just...
have not considered legislation, and we have not been approached by anybody else on legislation.
And why not?
I couldn't tell you.
I want to ask about the threshold. As I understand your initiative, it's sort of a one-way process. If folks want to go the route of public power, they've got this 2/3 vote requirement. But what if a community or an area that's served currently by public power decides they want out of that and they want to come into PG&E's service? Would there be a similar 2/3 vote requirement in that situation?
Assembly member, it's my understanding that in that scenario, by law currently, there does have to be a vote, and you do have to have the 2/3 threshold. There was a situation several years ago following the energy crisis where there was a municipal utility in the Central Valley that was struggling mightily, and they had considered actually, let me rephrase that. There were a couple of board members who had considered the possibility of going back to an investor-owned utility, and they would have had to hit the 2/3 threshold.
In their service area?
Yes.
Are you aware legally why that would be? Because that strikes me as surprising.
I don't have it in front of me, but I will get you the law.
Okay.
It's in the statute.
All right, thank you.
Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions for Mr. Bedwell and also for Mr. Bagat. Following up on Assemblyman Huffman's line of questioning, I think you can't just tell us you don't know. When asked, why didn't you come back to the legislature to amend a statute created by the legislature? Can you give us some better reasoning than I don't know?
Well, I believe that we, through the PUC, through the CCA organizations, primarily the three that we've dealt with thus far, San Joaquin Valley Power Authority, Marin Energy, and believe it's the Clean Power in San Francisco, we believe that we are working within the framework of the statute to deal with those three. If there was something in every law that the legislature passed that we didn't like, I think we'd have a pretty lengthy bill list. So
Do you take them all to the ballot?
Pardon me?
Do you take them all to the ballot?
No, we would not take them all to the ballot. But again, as I said to Assemblymember Huffman, if this is an attempt to say that this is a run on CCA, we would disagree with you. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. The word I believe I used was target.
Target,
yes.
Right. So you may interpret it that way, but I'd like to share with the committee, Mr. Chair, just a few lines of a letter that was sent on the President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg's letterhead, co-signed by me and a handful of my Senate colleagues, addressed to Peter Darby, the Chairman and CEO of PG&E Corporation, a letter to which we never got a response. It reads, PG&E's willingness to use the initiative process to unwind a carefully negotiated statute that PG&E supported lacks the mutual respect and honor that the legislature expects from stakeholders in the legislative process. If PG&E has recanted its support of CCA, it has an obligation to seek those revisions in the legislature, to use the initiative process to pursue PG&E's self-interest and avoid engaging your partners in the AB 117 agreement calls into question your company's integrity. So you may think this is a small matter, but we here take it very seriously. And for us not even to get a response from your chairman is only a double slap in the face. If you've got a problem, and I understand you have a different assessment of CCA today than you did at the time that you supported AB 117, for you not to come back here, express your grievance, hold public hearings, propose legislation, and respectfully engage the legislative process really does not reflect well upon PG&E's participation in the legislative process, and we don't take it lightly. You had said earlier, Mr. Bedwell, that this measure is not inconsistent with SMUD's ballot battle over YOLO with you or Prop H in San Francisco. Was the YOLO vote or Prop H a two-thirds majority vote?
No, the YOLO was a vote of both jurisdictions, both the acquiring and the complete service territory. That's the area I was referring to. Yes.
Simple majority threshold?
Yes, and the San Francisco was a vote as opposed to just an action by a political jurisdiction.
And you don't care to correct your statement that this is not inconsistent with a simple majority vote?
I will amend my statement that it did not include the two-thirds vote.
This is not an insignificant difference.
I would disagree with you on the insignificant difference. I stand corrected, as you've brought out. In both those cases, the point I was attempting to make was in those jurisdictions, the electorate had a vote on the matter.
And can you describe to us how Prop 16 exemplifies your abiding by the statute of AB 117 in cooperating fully?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I'll read again from the language of AB 117. All electrical corporations shall cooperate fully with any community choice aggregators that investigate, pursue, or implement community choice aggregation programs. So could please describe how 116 is consistent with that? Prop 16 is consistent with that.
I think that what it does is, again, before you get into these situations, you have a full airing of the electorate before you get into either the municipalization of the facilities or the community choice aggregation. And I don't see how that's necessarily inconsistent. The cooperation aspect of it, I believe, is in the implementation of that program once an entity has gone down that path.
Two-thirds majority vote is higher threshold than a simple majority.
Yes.
It's a higher bar,
Yes.
harder to attain.
Yes.
I think the LAO used the word hurdle.
High bar.
High bar. Okay. How is a high bar in any way consistent with cooperate fully? Why would you put a high bar into the equation when you supported legislation which said you would cooperate fully?
Again, I think that all this does is it provides the electorate in that jurisdiction to have the opportunity to say to that municipal entity, do you want to go down the path? I don't see it's a matter of cooperation or lack of cooperation. Okay. I think the cooperation is relevant to the statute once you get there.
Did you propose that as an amendment to AB 117 before you supported the language cooperate fully?
I do not know if we provided that as an amendment.
I doubt that you did.
I do not know.
It's not in the bill, clearly, and you supported the bill without it.
Correct. The bill that passed was not the original bill that was introduced.
So again, why not come back to the legislature with this measure? And then one last question for Mr. Ragat. And I suspect you can answer a little more forthrightly because you're not the legislative analyst's office, and I respect that office completely. Will Prop 16, if passed and enacted, expand competition into the electrical market?
I don't know that Prop 16 has the effect of increasing or decreasing competition. I think that Prop 16 simply sets up a vote of the electorate to decide who they want to provide their electricity.
Puts a high bar in front of any community choice or aggregation that wasn't in the original AB 117. We all recognize that. It's not my words, it's Mr. Bedwell. High bar. So a high bar encourages competition or discourages competition?
I think the threshold issue for the business community here is the act of the government being responsible to the electorate, and the electorate being involved in communicating its wish, whether that be to have a municipal utility or a privately owned utility supply its electricity, and more than that, having a say, whether that's regardless of how you choose to describe the hurdle, being able to have a say in how its government commits itself and the funds that they raise from their constituents on long-term investments.
In effect, I think it will be recognized that this measure is an anti-competition measure, and I just think that it's pretty astounding that the California Chamber of Commerce would actually support a measure that, in effect, whether intended or otherwise, will in fact, because of a high bar specifically put onto the ballot as a constitutional amendment, will indeed limit competition. I would suggest by design. And Mr. Chair, you've been very gracious with your time. I just want to share with the committee the final paragraph of an editorial from the Sacramento Bee dated Tuesday, January 19th of this year. The PG&E ballot measure is another troubling example of the initiative process going dangerously awry in California, of a powerful special interest seizing the initiative process for its own narrow benefit. The measure the utility is bankrolling is not a simple statute. It is a constitutional amendment. If it passes, it enshrines unfair protections against competition for PG&E, one of the richest, most powerful corporations in the state, into the California Constitution. It is unusual for the Bee to come out against a ballot measure before the campaign has really started. The PG&E initiative deserves special attention. It's that bad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leno. Member Huffman. All right. I've refrained from chastising the audience thus far, but there have been outbursts, there have been applause. I need you guys to keep it in check. Member Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I wanted to come back, Mr. Bedwell, to this issue of whether this two-thirds requirement flows both ways. And you've said that you're familiar with a situation where an area served by a public authority thought about going to an IOU service arrangement, and there was some kind of a two-thirds vote requirement. I'm not aware of anything like that. I've checked with committee staff. They likewise don't know of any legal requirement why that would be the case, but maybe you can provide me with that authority offline. I'll be happy to receive it. In any case, I think it is fair to say that under the construct of your initiative, if PG&E were extending its service territory to bring in a new community, for example, there would be no requirement for a two-thirds vote. However, if a municipal authority was annexing a new area, there would be. And so it does appear that there's something of a double standard in this initiative, and the only way I can sort of justify that would be if the assumption in this initiative is that it's inherently riskier to go from private power to public power. And so I just wanted to ask you, is that fair to say that an underlying assumption here is that going to public power is inherently riskier than staying with an IOU?
Well, I won't comment on the riskier going to public power. As the analyst indicated, there are some instances where municipal does have higher rates and costs and so forth. I would say that in the example that you gave me in that question, I'm assuming that we would already have that service territory right now, the way you asked the question of the annexation, because that greenfield, if you will, right, is already assigned to a provider. As Senator Padilla said, every spot of land in California has somebody with the obligation to serve it. So I'm assuming that in the PG&E service territory, it would either be an adjoining muni municipal publicly owned utility or an investor-owned utility, which would be us, we would not have the obligation to vote as that development occurred. But we also, in the utility business right now, have the obligation to plan and begin to prepare to serve for that. So there is a cost that of acquiring that land, that service territory, that's incurred, that, you know, how expensive it is or how inexpensive it is for the POU to serve. I couldn't answer that.
Well, it is true, though.
Whether it's riskier.
Yeah. It is true, though, that your initiative is a one-way approach to this. It is that moving from private to public requires two-thirds, but and you could have provided that same threshold across the board for any kind of change in power service, regardless of which direction, right? But you chose not to.
We chose to put this initiative on to give Californians the right to determine who was going to serve them.
Okay. And it does seem to me that that reflects a policy that you're asking the state of California to adopt that says there's a higher threshold when you go to any kind of public power. And I would just point out that it is my understanding that, notwithstanding the rather memorable bankruptcy that we saw with PG&E not too long ago, that we've never experienced a situation where a public power authority, I realize bankruptcy is not an option for public entities, but where insolvency or failure occurred during that same time frame. So
I would offer that during that same time frame that we struggled mightily, as did Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, there were other municipal or publicly owned utilities that financially, to use a phrase, took a beating as well. And the entity that I referred to, in part, was driven to their dire financial situation and came close to that going below, if you will, in part because of the energy crisis. So we were not alone. And Assemblymember Huffman,
yes.
if I can just try and answer your question. I believe the reference, we'll get this to you and to the committee, is Public Utility Code Section 10055 and 10051. But we'll follow up with you to your office.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Have Assemblymember Swanson, followed by Assemblymember Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of the State Assembly, I know this body can be dysfunctional at times, and so I'm not going to criticize the initiative process. I think that is part of our democracy, and it's part of an option that should be available to everyone to pursue important questions. Part of the purpose of this public hearing is to help sort out for the public pros and cons of Proposition 16, and I wanted to just give you a chance to elaborate more on those objectives, the positive objectives that are inherent in what motivates this proposition. And so I would ask Mr. Wetch, the assumption is that the workforce is concerned, well, I guess, about stability and sustainability, in a industry that doesn't have peaks and valleys, but in fact can sustain and pay for itself into the future and support a workforce that can be relied on. That how does that play into this proposition and how this matter is trying to go forward?
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Scott Wetch on behalf of the Coalition of Utility Employees. We're highly skeptical of the ability of CCAs to be able to deliver retail service at a cost below what the existing munis or the existing investor-owned utilities can. I think it's important to remember that, with the exception of a few very small, tiny municipal utilities, the majority of the municipal utilities in the state of California have been around since the 1940s. They have a great deal of experience in the energy markets. They own some of their own generation. In the cases of the investor-owned utilities, they have depreciated generation assets that are very efficient in providing power to the ratepayers, specifically the nuclear power facilities and the large hydro that PG&E has, for instance. So the concern that we have is that the figures and the projections that we've seen by some of these consultants that have a financial interest in getting CCAs passed are so inadequate that the reality to the locally elected official who will find themselves sitting on the board is going to be dramatic. And it's going to necessitate going back to their constituents and getting significant rate increases approved to make the whole thing work. At the same time, we're fighting a constant battle at the Public Utilities Commission to get built into the rate base an adequate amount of funding to ensure that the infrastructure system that we have in California is adequate. It was not built, for instance, most transformers that are in use today that are come from the 50s were not put in place with the idea of a household having 4 flat-screen plasma TVs and 3 computer systems and hard drives and all kinds of other appliances, and the load on that is tremendous. And we saw that in Los Angeles when we had power outages for over a week last summer. So we're constantly fighting a fight at the PUC to get built into the rate base of the IOUs adequate capital funds to be able to upgrade those systems. We're afraid that as these communities choose CCA and they're faced with the reality of instituting larger rates than they perhaps had envisioned, it will create downward pressure for then those same communities to lobby the PUC to keep rates down on the transmission and distribution portion, which the utilities maintain. So they don't have to worry about who's paying. They don't have to worry about the obligation of keeping a system together. They're just going to be concerned with keeping rates low because of the situation they face with their constituents. And that's the rub that we're very, very concerned with.
Okay. And let me just ask, I asked Mr. Bedwell if he could respond to this, but I asked the LAO earlier about the question of risks involved with the expansion of service. And you brought up an additional point that I hadn't thought about, and that's the cost centers involved in that risk in terms of, as the chair has indicated, the continual supplying of services in a failed environment. If expansion fails, then there's some costs associated with that question. And so the two parts of this question deals with, in this new environment that we have and the infrastructure requirements that are going forward, significant capital investment, how does that play into the motive, this question of motive, and as this matter is going forward, at least and in part of the public debate that has to be had around this initiative that speaks to the question of risks?
Well, I don't know that I can discuss the motive because I don't think there's a motive here, other than the fact that PG&E and Southern California Edison, to a lesser extent San Diego, have all had governmental challenges to their institution, if you will. And we, at the end of the day, either through contact through customers or contact through elected officials, not many of these have gone forward in recent years. The risk, if you will, Assembly Member, is that, as Mr. Wetch pointed out, the energy business has changed dramatically since the energy crisis. Our economy, even though it's a little soft today, is different than it was 10, 15 years ago. We saw that with increased demand 5 to 8 years ago when servers, these large server farms, were moving peak load up. Instead of peaking at the end of the Sunday, if you will, we now see the peak going well into the evening, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So a utility that gets into this business, or a CCA that gets into this business, is a completely different business than it was 10 years ago. When those customers, as I alluded to, as during the energy crisis, which Mr. Huffman brought up, When direct access failed, or when direct access marketers or providers walked away or said, we're done, we're out of California for all of their reasons, where did the customers go? They defaulted back to the investor-owned utility, who then, as Mr. Huffman pointed out, we were a little hurting right there at that point financially. And so the risk was it comes back to our customers to pick it up for them. We pick those customers back up because we have the obligation to serve under law. So we do believe there's a risk if these things aren't thought out, if they're not well planned. As is mentioned, there's a cottage industry out there, folks, that say we can make you money. The argument a couple of years ago was we can put money in your general fund. And those have not panned out. So when we have, to Senator Leno's point about cooperation, I would view cooperation maybe, well, obviously a little bit different than Senator Leno does. But in the discussion and the debates that we have, on MEA with the proponents, we have attempted to raise what we believe are the risks. Are you sure when you say you can deliver at 25, 20, 15, whatever your price cut is, and the product is this? Is that what you can really deliver? Because we buy every day in large quantities, billions of dollars of power, and we just frankly question how they can do it. So the risk for them is financial. I'd refer you to talk to the treasurer of Marin County, where Marin's a hotbed right now. He has a fiduciary responsibility to that jurisdiction from the financial side. He is an opponent. There are many proponents of MEA, but he is, from the financial side and the risk, a strong opponent. And I can refer you to either him or his comments. So that's what I view as the risk in this.
Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Swanson, again, if I could just comment real quick. When we talk about risk, I think one of the questions that was brought up before was, is there that there's a higher threshold to go to a municipal than from to a private. And while I can't talk about whether it's riskier to be with an MOU or with a muni or with an IOU, I can speak to the fact of who bears the burden of that risk. And when you have a company like PG&E or SDG&E or Edison, the risk is borne by a private industry. If there are problems in that market, then that private industry bears that risk and that burden. If it is with a municipal utility, then that risk is ultimately borne by the taxpayers who are footing the bill for that. And as Mr. Wetch and Mr. Bedwell mentioned before, oftentimes they have to come back in and try and get higher rates because the rate of return that they thought they were going to get, or the profit margin they thought they were going to get, simply is not there. This is a very capital intensive with a long rate of return type business, and many municipals are not ready for that. And so, you know, we believe when you have that risk on the taxpayer who will ultimately bear the burden of whether that industry survives or thrives, we feel that there should be more scrutiny on that. And again, this is one of the reasons why the Chamber of Commerce is here, because as that industry has problems, and say a PG&E is forced to come in, this could ultimately lead to higher rates. It could also lead to higher pressure to raise taxes or raise fees, all of which are then handled in large part, I would say, by the California employer community.
Well, thank you. You have answered my question.
Assemblymember Skinner.
Thank you. I want to go back to a question that Mr. Huffman raised, where he pointed out that the measure as written is very narrowly defined, very narrowly construed, in that it requires a 2/3 approval only for if a local government is making a switch in terms of the electricity provider or plans to. And what Mr. Huffman asked is, you know, why so narrowly construed? Because you could conceivably have a circumstance where, say, an existing muni were to go out of business, and the IOU the territory, if it was adjacent to an IOU territory, then the IOU might be in this circumstance to take on those customers. And yet the initiative is not designed such that that new set of customers, that locality, would have to vote by 2/3 as to whether they would be under that service. And you answered that the purpose of the measure was to protect, in effect, what I'm going to interpret that from is protect ratepayers somehow. And yet, if that was in fact the intent, why isn't this a 2/3 requirement for any change in electric service provision?
I don't know if you were here at the time, but I believe we addressed, or we're working off of BlackBerry here, so we've referenced a code section in which we believe we have a citation that says that the same has to occur for an investor-owned utility in the scenario you described.
Okay. All right, but it wouldn't, so now I
it's existing
understand.
Law.
So, but it wouldn't be for annexations, only for...
The way I understand the law, and again, I would be happy to have this in more detail if I had the law in front of me to read. I believe it is for any acquisition of non-IOU held service territory.
Okay. Okay.
Members, any additional questions? Very good. Very good, Senator Leno.
Again, it's just confounding that no one can at least be as forthright as Chairman Peter Darby has been with regard to this limiting of competition. And I think that in this setting, we should be speaking directly to each other and with as much forthrightness as possible. This is from the Mercury News editorial opposing Prop 16. It says that in an October earnings call with analysts, PG&E executives made it clear they are eager to retain market share. And this is a quote from Peter Darby. "We value our customers very much, and we are going to stand up and resist efforts to take over our customers." This is all about limiting competition, amending the state constitution so one corporation can limit its competition. I'm just amazed that the Chamber of Commerce can support this. I understand PG&E can support this, but amazed that the Chamber of Commerce can support this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members, any additional questions? Mr. Bedwell, did you want to?
Senator, if I may, Senator, I would stand obviously by the chairman's comments. We, as I said in my prepared remarks, we value our customers. We believe that over the period of time we have a much better understanding of what our customers want. We have an interaction and a relationship with our customers. I think through the last 6 to 7 years in San Francisco over the debate of public power in San Francisco with PG&E, you know that we're very committed to retaining our customers there, as we are throughout all of our service territory. So that statement, I think, is a very valid statement and one that Peter Darby has a great deal of fervor behind.
Mr. Bedwell, I'm a PG&E customer in San Francisco, both in my home and at my business. And I'm a SMUD customer at my home here in Sacramento. I pay PG&E 25% more, and I get more green power here in Sacramento for the lower cost. And my small business suffers regularly blackouts in San Francisco because the lack of investment in infrastructure is that significant. I pay more if I had better service. I've never had a blackout here in Sacramento once.
Mr. Huffman.
Mr. Chair, you'll be glad this is my last comment because I have to leave.
I will be.
But I want to thank the witnesses for their patience and their answers. And I just want to say, as I leave this hearing, and thanks again for having it, I have worked with PG&E, and there have been times when we've crossed swords. I've been quick to praise PG&E when it shows leadership, like pulling out of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce over their refusal to do the right thing on global warming. I applaud you for that. Today, I am scratching my head and wondering, what is PG&E thinking? It is with great regret that I got to tell you I think this is a terrible initiative, and with all due respect and with hopes that we will get back to working together on better public policy initiatives, I have to just sort of state my position for the record on that one, and thank you again for the hearing.
Very good. Thank you, panel, for your participation.